This is my first iPhone. Yeah, you heard that right. My first iPhone. You see, I've been testing out Android smartphones here on the channel for the majority of my life. I've gone through the Samsungs, Motorola's, LG's, rest in peace, OnePlus's, and Pixels of the world. And while a lot of them still offer an amazing experience, I wanted to try out what Apple had to offer with the iPhone, so I caved in. Not to mention, my previous experience with the Pixel 6 Pro really steered me to switching to this phone. By the way, you can check out that video right over here if you really want to get the complete breakdown. Anyways, this is the iPhone 13 Pro. I chose this over the regular 13 for two main reasons, which might sound silly, but hear me out. One is the fact that it comes with a 120Hz ProMotion display. I've been spoiled by high refresh rate screens on Android smartphones, so going back to 60Hz on the regular 13 felt like a punishment. The second reason was the telephoto camera. Now, I love to take photos, and it's part of what I do for a living, so having that extra reach to compose shots is pretty important to me. If none of what I said matters to you, save yourself some money and just get the regular 13, because at $1,000, the iPhone 13 Pro is one of the most expensive phones that I've spent my own money on. Now, this phone has been living in my pocket for the past 4 months, and my transition so far has been really good. But, there's always a but. There are certain things that I had to wrap my head around, especially with iOS and some of its complexities, which I'll get to later in the video. But first, I want to talk about the fit and finish of this phone because it is just absolutely incredible. When I unboxed it, the first thought that just rushed into my mind was, man, this is built exceptionally well, and to my taste too. The back features a matte glass finish that can resist fingerprints. The ceramic shield front glass hosting the display blends in really well with the stainless steel frame, and that along with the flat display gives you a really good grip when you're holding the phone in one hand. I did wish if Apple replaced the stainless steel finish with a matte texture, but you only get that with the standard 13. But you know what? None of what I said would really matter if you decide to throw a case on it, as I did. I also tossed in a screen protector on the phone just to be safe, since I've heard that iPhones are notorious for getting scratches even with the slightest aggressive use. So now you know exactly what my setup has been for the past 4 months. I also picked up this graphite 120GB model, but if you want to switch it up, Apple does offer the 13 Pro in gold, silver, Sierra blue, and the newly announced Alpine green. Now, about this form factor, it is just perfect for my hands. It's not too big or too small like the 13 mini, because the 6.1-inch display is adequate screen real estate for my usage. I didn't have any issues with reachability. However, it is a bit on the heavier side. And for context, the Galaxy S22 is almost 20% lighter than the 13 Pro. So if you're holding the phone while you're in bed or lying down on a couch looking at content, you will start to experience fatigue quite easily. The buttons are nice and tactile with no signs of rattling, and I was expecting that for a phone that costs $1,000. I also appreciate the alert slider on the side, which comes in clutch at times when I want to silence notifications or any sounds. It low-key reminded me of using a OnePlus smartphone. Speaking of notifications, the haptic motor inside the 13 Pro is excellent. It's really strong. I haven't missed any calls or text prompts when I've had this thing in my pocket, so that's great. As for the built-in speakers, you are getting a stereo setup with the earpiece at the top and bottom-facing drivers. The output is clear with a little sprinkle of bass. There is good clarity with the vocals, but it's not the best that I've heard from a smartphone, because that certainly goes to the ROG Phone 5 with its massive dual front-facing speakers at the front. Now, I don't use these speakers that much since I paired the 13 Pro with my AirPods to listen to music and watch shows on Netflix, so it's not of great importance. But you know what is? Call quality. And I'm happy to report that it has been excellent on the 13 Pro. I didn't experience any call dropping issues as I did with the Pixel 6 Pro, so that's a relief. Interestingly, I did notice that the built-in flashlight was much weaker in terms of output compared to my Pixel 6 Pro and some other Android smartphones that I've had. It's honestly useless if you choose to rely on it as a utility to find things in a darkroom setting. Now, what's it like living with the notch? Well, I had to face it anyway because it's part of the design, and one could argue that it looks a bit dated compared to modern Android flagships with hole punch cameras at the front and nearly bezel-less displays. But there is a valid reason for this. You see, this notch houses Apple's secure FaceID authentication, which uses an IR camera and advanced facial recognition software or algorithms to log into the device. They've actually shrunken the size this year with the 13 series compared to the 12 series. And given that this is my first experience using this feature, I was genuinely impressed. It only took a few seconds to set up and it works every single time, even when I was in a pitch black environment. It especially comes in handy when you're trying to get into the phone during colder winter days when you're all covered up in winter gear. A phone with a fingerprint scanner, it would require a little bit more effort. That being said, during the pandemic, this tech did struggle to log in with a face mask on, but the recent iOS 15.4 update added that feature, so kudos to Apple for that. The 6.1-inch OLED display is great. You all know what OLED can do, and this phone gives you exactly that with punchy colors and deeper blacks. I still think Samsung offers some of the best saturation levels if that's what you're looking for, but is it a noticeable difference than the rest of the competition? Not really, because I still think this technology has reached a plateau. It still gets plenty bright when you're viewing content outdoors, and the 120Hz ProMotion feature seals the deal. But remember, it doesn't stay at that refresh rate full time. Apple actually dynamically shifts that refresh rate between 10 to 120 Hz to preserve battery life. And so far, the experience has been really smooth, whether if it's navigating through iOS or even third-party applications. I will say that oftentimes Gmail decides to give up on that feature because it does tend to lag or stay at 60 Hz when I'm scrolling through long threads of email, but I just think that's a Gmail thing and not necessarily a hardware issue. I also noticed that over the first few weeks of using this phone, the right-hand side of the display was exhibiting a pinkish gradient shift when I enabled dark mode or if I had anything gray displayed on it. So I took it back to the Apple Store and the support team identified the issue, and within an hour, they replaced the entire display. It was pretty eye-opening, and I walked out as a very satisfied customer. Now look, everyone's experience with Apple support can vary depending on their situation, but I thought this was worth bringing up because Android phones still have a long way to catch up to the level of support that Apple offers with their devices. I know Samsung is getting there, but look at the rest of the players. I guess I'll maybe revisit this topic in another video. Speaking of support, now might be a good time to show some love for today's video sponsor.
The view is spectacular indeed with the Corsair Xeneon monitor. 32 inches of gorgeous goodness with 165Hz refresh rate, QHD resolution, and plenty of streamer-friendly features including IQ support for OSD so you can enjoy your screen with zero dead pixel guarantee. Check it out below.
All right, one of the things that I was afraid of when I bought the iPhone 13 Pro was its battery life, because smaller phones naturally have smaller batteries. And if you look at my history of using Android smartphones, most of them, if not all of them, are supersized monsters rocking 4,000 to 5,000 milliamp hours that lasted me a few days. This one only has a 3,000 milliamp hour battery, so I was preparing to accept defeat. But boy, was I wrong. The 13 Pro surpassed my expectations, guys. I mostly ended up my days with close to 30% and 7 hours of screen on time left. I even pushed it a few times with extensive GPS and streaming services, and I ended up killing it with 7.5 hours of screen on time. Bottom line is that I can easily extract 2 days worth of use from my phone. That's pretty comparable to some of my previous Android phones, but remember, for this size, it really says something. So what sort of magical sauce is Apple using here? Optimization, people, because Apple has been making their hardware and software for years, and they've clearly been learning and making adjustments over time to give users a seamless experience, and that's the driving factor for people to stay with this platform. Take MagSafe, for instance. It's a brilliant and thoughtful feature that works so well. Essentially, it's a series of magnets placed around the iPhone's internal charging coil that automatically opens a gateway of accessories to fit users' needs. I bought this car mount from Belkin that features MagSafe support, so it's this leather case that Apple will happily sell you for 80 bucks. And this combination provides a seamless set it and forget it driving experience. I don't have to break my head trying to mount my smartphone every time when I get inside my car. It just works. And for those of you wondering, it actually holds up really well with Toronto's pothole-infested roads, so yeah, that's awesome. This phone also supports wireless charging, but it's not the fastest out there. It only tops out at 7.5 watts using Qi or 15 watts using MagSafe. And listen, it's not a deal breaker for me since I mostly charge my phone before I go to bed, and Apple has implemented some optimizations to reduce battery aging. But you know what's deal breaker? Getting used to this lightning connector. It just doesn't make any sense, guys. I don't understand why Apple is sticking to this ancient 2.0 spec proprietary thingy. Funny enough, they're actually marketing this phone towards pro users, but transferring 4K ProRes video, which this phone is capable of shooting, is completely bottlenecked by this lightning connector. Apple's iPads and MacBooks have already transitioned to faster USB-C ports. But why not this? I'm truly perplexed. Now, what about performance? Well, it's fine, to be honest. Actually, the right question would be, what's the experience like using the hardware and software? Because Apple made the A15 Bionic chip, and iOS has been their bread and butter for the past 14 years. So it's been pretty flawless on my end. Apps are responsive, and I barely noticed any slowdowns. It only has 6 GB of RAM, but it manages to hold up really well with my multitasking needs. I've had 20 plus applications running in the background, which I didn't even notice until I started to clear them one by one. It's just a habit that I'm used to, guys, but I did wish if it had a clear all button like Android. Now, before you guys start commenting on why my home screen looks different than usual, it's because I'm using a custom icon pack designed by Rami Elnagar. I'll actually leave a link to his video on how to do this whole setup, but it did take me a whole day to set this thing up using shortcuts, which is a complete pain in the ass. I mean, this is what made me miss Android so much. It's the customization factor. And I think this is the perfect segue to talk about some of the complexities that I had to deal with when I switched over to the iPhone. First things first, I lost all my WhatsApp messages. For some reason, you can't back up and restore messages from Android to iOS and vice versa. It took me a few days to process that, and then I wanted to change the ringtone to something custom made, and what do you know? There's no easy way of doing that either. I had to use this guide to get that working. I'll leave a link down below if you wanted to do that as well. The file system is also so limiting, and it lacks granular control. For instance, on Android, you get a bird's eye view of everything that's on your phone, like downloads, photos, videos, audio files, docs, apps, and you can even access the root directory. On iOS, this is all you get. Now sure, you can create your own folders and spend time organizing your stuff, but Android sorts things out for you right away. Then there is iCloud. Did you know that Apple only gives you 5 GB of free storage to back up anything you have versus 15 GB that Google offers? Yeah, 5 GB is an absolute joke if you want to back up any messages. I actually learned that the hard way when I got a notification from WhatsApp saying that it didn't have any space to back up any text. So I had to spare some change every month to get the next tier, which was 50 GB. If you really think about it, I could have used that to get a delicious Tim Hortons small double-double, but I had no option. That's how brands get you. And then there's this whole ecosystem conversation that I wanted to talk about because I was a hardcore Android user. All of my smart home devices were linked to my Google Home app and, of course, my Google Home mini speakers as well, including my NVIDIA Shield TV. Legendary streaming device, by the way. But if I wanted to cast anything that's displayed on my iPhone to the Shield TV, I can't do that because they can't talk to each other like a typical Android phone. I know, it's tough at first, but I got used to it, and aside from that one hiccup, the rest of the platform was pretty easy to understand. Most of my smart home devices were supported through Apple's HomeKit API, so I had to take some time to reconfigure them to work with Siri, which works pretty well, and you're set after that. There are a few other perks that come with this ecosystem like AirDrop, which in my opinion is a godsend. I use this multiple times a day to share files between my Mac, my iPad, and the iPhone. I can even take phone calls on my Mac, respond to iMessages, and just witnessing this beautiful harmony made me go out and get the AirPods. And so now these earbuds automatically switch between these devices seamlessly. It just works. And I guess the best way of summarizing all of this is that when you choose to get an iPhone, it essentially turns itself into a token to Apple's brilliant ecosystem. Once you're in, you're really in, and it's really difficult to get out. All right, finally, it's time to talk about cameras. I'll get right to it. You get 3 sensors, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide, a 12 megapixel standard, and a 12 megapixel telephoto setup. Now on paper, that might not sound like a lot compared to 48 or 108 megapixel offerings from the competition, But that didn't stop me from exploring this phone's true potential. Let's start with the ultra-wide camera. The field of view is adequate to fit so much of the subject into the frame, and the colors look balanced since I chose to shoot in the rich contrast setting. You can switch to standard mode if you want to get a flatter look, but either way, the results are great. Dynamic range is on point without too much emphasis on HDR processing, and if you're really picky about pixels, the 12 megapixel sensor falls a bit short compared to what's already out there, since this phone does struggle to capture details, especially in low light. I would hands down pick the Pixel 6 Pro over the iPhone since Google's magic sauce with night photography is bananas. Switching to the main camera, and once again, the iPhone delivers clean, balanced, and contrasty photos without boosting the shadows that much. However, I did wish if it took brighter photos because throughout my testing period, I noticed that the images were a bit underexposed, but with the magic of some editing using Lightroom, you can get a lot more out of the raw photos that come out of the camera. I also feel like this 12 megapixel sensor is starting to show its age because in some cases, it tries really hard to emphasize a detail, but it can't due to the size. You can clearly see that when you start to shoot in low light environments. This phone just can't keep up, guys. The telephoto lens is super nice. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I love shooting portraits and subjects with this focal length, but I just wished if it had a bigger sensor to capture a bit more detail. If you give it a lot of light, it'll love you back. But if you don't, well, it'll just struggle to give you satisfying results. Portrait mode works pretty well, but I still think Pixel and Samsung have nailed that feature. If you have a pet, you might struggle to get that perfect separation, and if you love shooting random objects, it does an okay job at detecting that, but don't expect mind-blowing results. The selfie camera is good. It's a hit or miss sometimes because this phone, for some reason, struggles to capture my skin tones accurately. The image on the left-hand side looks like somebody applied a Vaseline filter or something. It's just not me. And then there's macro mode, which is cool, but I didn't really use that much. I know some people who use this for work to capture details of certain equipments and stuff, so I guess that's beneficial, but either way, it's there if you like being a little bit more creative. I think with photography, the iPhone 13 Pro delivers respectable results. I know word on the street is that Apple is working on a bigger sensor or higher megapixel sensor for the next iPhone. We'll just have to wait and see how that addresses some of my concerns. But with that being said, I was pleasantly surprised with the video quality coming out of this camera. Something about the colors, the stabilization, and just the overall processing made me consider using this as a secondary camera for shooting B-roll. And now that I can shoot ProRes, it just gives creators like myself that extra flexibility with post-processing. Cinematic mode is pretty cool. I actually think it got a lot better with software updates over the past few months, so I do see myself taking advantage of this every now and then. I just wish that Apple gave this camera app a little bit more control with things like ISO, exposure, shutter speed, and white balance. You know, stuff that actually matters to cinematographers. So my experience with my first iPhone has been both good and bad, but mostly good just to get the record straight for you guys. You see, initially, it was hard to say goodbye to my WhatsApp messages and getting used to this limiting file system, iCloud being such a pain in the butt with just 5 gigabytes to start with, and lack of customization was just certainly something that I had to wrap my head around. But once I passed that point, I thoroughly started to enjoy using this phone because the form factor is just perfect. The display is beautiful with ProMotion. The haptics are strong. I love FaceID. I mean, seriously, the accuracy is 1,000 times better than some of the Android phones that I've tested in the past. I've never had an issue with app stability, and the way how it talks to my Mac and my AirPods just makes me appreciate the hard work that Apple put into building this ecosystem. Albeit a very expensive and brilliant ecosystem, but it works. And that's what matters to me. So on that note, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.